Aeroflot Flight 593 was cruising smoothly at 33,000 feet over Siberia. The weather was calm, the aircraft was functioning normally, the autopilot was engaged. Then, without warning, the plane began turning. At first, only slightly, but within seconds, the aircraft rolled harder and harder to the right. Inside the cockpit, confusion erupted. Alarms sounded. Pilots shouted over each other. The aircraft entered a violent descent. Minutes later, all 75 people on board were dead. Investigators would eventually discover that this disaster wasn't caused by weather, or hijacking, or mechanical failure. It was caused by something almost impossible to believe. It's March 23rd, 1994. Aeroflot Flight 593 departs Moscow, bound for Hong Kong. The aircraft is an Airbus A310, one of the most technologically advanced passenger jets of its time. Conditions are perfect. The flight climbs normally to cruising altitude. Nothing appears unusual. For several hours, the aircraft moves quietly through the darkness over Siberia. Everything is operating exactly as expected. Everything was fine. The aircraft begins to bank, slowly, almost imperceptibly. At first, nobody in the cockpit reacts. The movement is subtle enough to feel normal, but the turn continues. 10 degrees, 20 degrees, then 45. Passengers likely begin noticing something is wrong. Finally, warning alarms activate inside the cockpit. The crew suddenly realizes the aircraft is no longer flying normally, but by now, the situation is rapidly spiraling out of control. The aircraft rolls aggressively. The nose drops. G-forces slam through the cabin. The pilots struggle to understand what's happening. The autopilot appears active, but the aircraft is no longer responding correctly. Precious seconds are lost in confusion. The Airbus enters a steep descent. At one point, the forces become so intense that some passengers may have briefly lost consciousness. The crew manages to partially recover control, but it's too late. Moments later, Flight 953 crashes into the mountains of Siberia. Sadly, there are no survivors. At first, investigators suspect a catastrophic mechanical failure, but the aircraft showed no major defects. And weather wasn't a factor either. There was no explosion, no hijacking, no fire on board. So why did a perfectly functional aircraft suddenly fall from the sky? The answer ended up coming from the cockpit voice recordings. As investigators listened to the audio recordings recovered from the black box, they noticed something strange. The voices in the cockpit didn't all belong to pilots. There were children inside the cockpit. The captain had brought his son and daughter into the flight deck during the flight, and at that point, the aircraft was on autopilot. The crew believed the children were only pretending to fly the plane, but there was something they didn't understand. On the Airbus A310, applying enough force to the controls could partially disengage the autopilot without a dramatic warning, and that's exactly what happened. While sitting in the captain's seat, the pilot's 15-year-old son unknowingly applied pressure to the controls. Slowly, the aircraft began turning. Nobody realized the autopilot had partially disconnected, until it was way too late. Investigators concluded that the crash of Aeroflot Flight 593 wasn't caused by a single catastrophic failure. It was caused by a chain of small decisions: relaxed cockpit discipline, confused autopilot design, delayed recognition, human error. Individually, none seemed fatal. Together, they killed 75 people. And ever since that incident, there's been one aviation lesson nobody really argues about anymore. Don't let kids fly the plane. Plane in the sky and it went down fast. Pilot was just trying to be a fun dad. Kids in the cockpit playing with the systems. Cruise control switched off and the steering kicked in. Too late to fix by the time it clicked in. 75 deceased, RIP to the victims.